Look, we've got material out there that has the background of the ambassador, and it is a pretty remarkable background. I mean, he is a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. He was a diplomat. I was a diplomat. We were both in Washington, although not at the same time. But his background in matters relating to government and the Americas, as a lawyer and a diplomat for the government of the Philippines, is a pretty extraordinary one. He was at the Department of Foreign Affairs in Manila. He served as the Assistant Secretary of the Office of American Affairs. He was Executive Director and Director for Treaties, Economic, Socio-Cultural of the Department of Foreign Affairs Office of Legal Affairs, Director of Social Development Issues, Human Rights, Economic, Finance, Agriculture, TCDC, and IP matters related to the Office of the United Nations and other international organizations. So I'm really, really happy to have him here today because we've got lots to talk about. And the background for this is, well, actually I should say first of all, thank you to Platform for giving us the space here today. This is really fantastic, and thank you for the support of the consulate, which is not far from here. It's actually just around the corner from my office, which is on 11th Avenue Southeast. They're on 10th Avenue Southeast, and I'm often out in front of my office, and I see people who are clearly looking for your office, and I'm happy to tell them where it is. But 3 years ago, the Canadian government announced an Indo-Pacific strategy, and it has lots of potential in it. Although the strategy was only 26 pages long and was released like on Christmas Eve 3 years ago, it still has tremendous potential. It was perhaps put in a bit of an abeyance for a bit because of relationships between the Prime Minister, as he then was, and Prime Minister Modi. But I think things are getting on track, and the Government of Canada set up an office in the Philippines, in Manila, to sort of work this Asia-Pacific strategy, this Indo-Pacific strategy. So, Ambassador, first of all, let me say welcome and thank you for coming to Calgary. Thank you. You started your posting here back in July of 2025. You've been in North America before, so you know what winters are like, and you certainly got a share of that a couple of weeks ago, right? And so just to make you feel more at home, we decided to have snow out here as well. But let me ask you this, first of all, before we get into any specific themes, I'm going to invite you to share some opening reflections that you have on how you see the Canada-Philippines relationship and what your priorities that you have during your tenure here as ambassador. I turn the floor to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gary, and thank you for having us. Our Consul General is with me and a couple of other colleagues from the Embassy in Ottawa and the Consulate here in Calgary. Good afternoon to everyone. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. I'm happy to be here, and as Gary said, I'm like nearly 5 months old, very new. I did serve in temperate countries, but I have been appropriately warned that it's nothing compared to the winters in Ottawa and Canada. And I've seen that already in a couple of snowfalls in Ottawa just in the last, I guess, 6 weeks. But thank you for giving us this platform to talk a little bit about not only really just my priorities as a new envoy here in Canada, together with colleagues in our 3 consulate generals across the country, Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto. But I think really an opportunity to share some of the views from Manila in terms of geopolitical challenges, the economic challenges that we all face in the international community today. So just to respond to your question, Gary, I think you mentioned you started off with the Indo-Pacific strategy. A lot of people, I don't know how many in the audience are skeptical about this particular strategy. A lot of other colleagues in the region have also been skeptical about the strategy. But I would just like to say, and I don't say this lightly, but I've been very clear to Global Affairs and to our colleagues in the Canadian government that I think the Philippines and the Philippine government is one of those who truly believe that this is, as you mentioned, an opportunity and a potential opportunity for all of us. And I would like to think that the Philippines has been ahead of the curve here, because even at the, you mentioned something about, the putting it in abeyance because of the big issue with one of an important country in the Indo-Pacific, but we have actually been starting to implement the Indo-Pacific strategy already with respect to Philippines-Canada relations. And that's why I think because of that, in the last couple of years, Philippine-Canada relations is in a good place. And I see really the challenge for us now is to ensure that the positive upward trajectory and momentum in our relations, at least bilaterally, is sustained and maintained in the next couple of months. What are our priorities in the next couple of years? I will just start off by perhaps contextualizing for you the diplomatic context of Philippine-Canada relations, and that is in the context of the foreign policy of President Marcos. President Marcos, when he came to office in June of 2022, was very clear that this is coming off, of course, the pandemic, and then of course off the administration of President Duterte, which had been a little bit more focused on domestic issues rather than engagement with the international community. President Marcos had been very clear in his first State of the Nation address a couple of weeks after assuming office that he wanted the Philippines to be re-engaged with the international community. He wanted the Philippines to be reintroduced, and he also insisted on diversification. He wanted to make sure that we diversified our relationships and, strengthened old relationships, such as the ones we have with Canada, but really also finding and blazing new trails in respect to non-traditional, non-intuitive Philippine bilateral relations. And then the other thing he was also very clear about is that economic security is equal to national security. And that is why we have been very happy with Canada's support, not only in the security cooperation aspect, but really in the economic partnership and the economic engagement that we've had with Canada over the course of the last few years. So over the course of the last few years, we're still trying to get those leaders meetings, either in Ottawa or in Manila, but there have been a whole lot of high-level meetings, ministerial meetings, both in Ottawa and in Manila. So I think, as I said, the challenge now is really just making sure, working together with our Canadian colleagues and our colleagues here in the consulates to make sure that we continue to strengthen and maintain the trajectory and the momentum of our relations.
So we've had diplomatic relations between Canada and the Philippines since 1949. And yet, I think that there's a lot of Canadians that don't know that much about it, in spite of the fact that there's nearly 1 million people of Filipino origin that live here in Canada. So I guess my question for you is this: what thing do you wish that Canadians understood more about the Philippines and the economic growth potential of the country? And I'll preface by saying, Robert Doe's here, Emerson, the company that he's with, is, they got 3,000 employees in the Philippines, the influence that the Filipino communities had here. I'm going to call on Matt Steppen to confirm whether the Yukon, their recent election, did they elect the first Filipino speaker in parliamentary history in Canada? Is that correct? Okay, so that is correct. So I mean, there are lots of things, but this is a country with, 110 million people, 400,000 square kilometers. I mean, Alberta seems big by comparison at 660,000 square kilometers and only 5 million people, so we got room to grow. But tell us what you think the economic opportunities are for Canadians and the Philippines.
Thank you for that. I think it's not surprising, because even our closest neighbors, even our closest friends, obviously Canada is our close one as well, sometimes are unfamiliar with the Philippines and are unfamiliar with the opportunities. So it's always been a challenge for us in the diplomatic service, for those who are doing trade promotion, to make sure that we get the news out. Because obviously in this time of social media and all, we need to make sure that there's accurate information there about opportunities and everything. What I want Canada to realize about the Philippines and growth potentials and opportunities for working together, one is not really purely economic, but really one that is, I think, fundamental. And that is that we have shared values. We are two countries, two peoples that believe in democracy, in freedom, in human rights, in the potential of the human being, and more importantly, I think in the economic aspect, in multilateralism and the multilateral trade rules. So obviously, these are shared values that I hope Canadian companies realize, because these will underpin all future and hopefully productive collaboration with each other. Now, having said that, I think and I hope Robert will agree with me, and it is validated by his workforce of his company in the Philippines, is that we have a workforce that is young. The median age is 25, 26. We have a workforce that is dynamic, and we have a workforce that it's dynamic, it's well educated, English speaking, hardworking, and then we have a workforce that is resilient. And we see that time and again, every time there are crises, whether it's natural or man-made, that the workforce will always make sure that they are there and committed to making sure that work continues for the companies to which they belong. So that's one. The other thing to remember also is that the Philippine economy in itself is really one of the strongest, highest growing economies in the Southeast Asia. We were over 5% over the last couple of years. We were hoping to maintain that for this year, but obviously with all of the tariff disruptions and all of the challenges, the headwinds we've faced this year, there have been a little bit of setbacks, but we're still hoping to maintain at least in the high fours or still breach the 5% GDP growth rate that we've set out for ourselves. And finally, really, just overall, the Filipinos. Many of you have Filipino friends here in Canada. You see just how hardworking and how resilient the Filipinos are. And the 1 million Filipinos living in this country, by the way, you're now the Filipinos here are now the second biggest diaspora in the entire world. And in Canada, the Filipinos in Alberta is the second largest community in this country. And it's really, they also form the backbone of that resilience that we've seen tried and tested over many crises in the past, including financial crises. And there's the ability to really rally towards making sure that we continue to support the motherland through remittances and through other help and support that communities overseas provide.
So let me ask. So I didn't ask you about this before, but as a supplementary question, you talk about common values, you talk about the ability to speak English, you talk about how hardworking and resilient the population is in the Philippines. Would you make the argument that for Canada, you should be using the Philippines as the entryway into the Indo-Pacific region?
Yes. And thank you for giving me that opportunity, Gary, because one thing that we always try to emphasize is that when you try to access the Philippines, you're not accessing only a 110, 115 million economy. You're accessing actually 600 to 700 million ASEAN economy. And that is, the economies in the region are now integrated because of a range of free trade agreements. So we have the ASEAN free trade agreements, we have the RCEP, and then hopefully at some point in the near future, we will have ASEAN-Canada free trade agreement as well. So definitely.
Okay, so talking about the diaspora of Filipinos here, it's a wide network of Filipinos across the country. What would you say would be the best ways for us to take that diaspora and help strengthen our trade, our investment, our innovation between our two countries?
Well, Filipinos, as I'm sure you've probably realized in your friendships, are a very, personal, community-oriented people. So I think, and when you go and do business in the Philippines, and I speak here particularly, probably not for companies like the one that Robert represents, but really for MSMEs and other entrepreneurs. I think your friendships and your networks with people in the community here and people in the communities back in the Philippines will be very critical in helping you navigate the business environment in the Philippines, because as in many places in Asia, everything is really very personal and very communal. So those relationships are very important in terms of making sure that you leverage all of the opportunities that are there.
So Canada's negotiating the Canada-ASEAN free trade agreement and exploring bilateral trade with the Philippines. Based on your discussions with exporters from the Philippines and investors, what do they hope to most get out of such an agreement?
Okay, so the Philippine situation is a little bit unique because we have relationships with countries with which we are negotiating FTAs, including Canada, where Canada, your MFN tariffs are already very low. So if you look at and then of course some of your sensitive sectors are not really key offensive sectors of interest to the Philippines. So if you look at FTA negotiations purely from a tariff reduction point of view, often some people would argue it doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? So therefore, but from the Philippine perspective, we have been doing FTA negotiations for a variety of reasons. Obviously, there are markets where we're looking for tariff reductions, but for markets like Canada, for example, it's really more of the signal that it gives to the investor community overseas. We look at it as a seal of good housekeeping. We look at it as an opportunity to improve regulations, to improve trade facilitation, and so on, to ensure that we lay down a trade and investment framework that is certain, that is stable, that is more formalized under a concrete and clear legal framework. And that's what we're trying to achieve with some of these FTAs, including the ones that we have with Canada. But I should hasten to add, however, that indeed there are still certain sectors, I think, that might be of interest to us. For example, garments. We're trying to diversify. The United States has been our primary garment export market, but obviously with all of the tariff disruptions and then some challenges in terms of domestic legislation in the United States, we're trying also to find other markets to target and to penetrate.
Excellency, a couple of the people that have joined us a little bit late include the Honorable Jason Kenney, former Premier of the Province of Alberta, the Honorable Lois Mitchell, the former Lieutenant Governor of the Province of Alberta. So I'm very careful in asking questions because at various times in my life, I've called both of them boss. So recognizing that former bosses of mine are in the audience, I'm going to ask you this question. Western Canada exports billions of dollars in agri-food and natural resources, and the Philippines already buys a significant amount of wheat, pork, copper concentrates, as well as forestry products and other natural resource products. In your view, where should Canadian businesses really place their focus if they want to expand trade exports to the Philippines?
Yeah, I think so. You're correct, Gary. I think Canada. We were just talking about this on the way down. There's Prime Minister Carney has put out the objective of doubling your exports to the non-traditional market. But I was telling Gary that in fact many of the provinces in Canada, including Alberta, have actually already done that as far as your exports to the Philippines is concerned over the last couple of years. I think what Canada will need to focus on would be, and rightly so, they're focusing on the ASEAN-Canada and hopefully the Philippine-Canada FTA to make sure that, because the Philippines, our MFN tariffs are very low as well. And especially in these areas to which you are exporting to us on, those tariffs are also very low already as well because we are a net food importing country and we have strategically opened up many of these sectors where we need the imports to supplement domestic supply and domestic production. So I think the FTAs will provide more certainty and more legal binding frameworks moving forward with respect to the exports that you're already doing. But in terms of future potential. This is something that I've been trying to socialize, and this goes, I guess, to one of your first questions about what I want Canadians and Canadian companies to know about the Philippines, which is the reality that there are a lot of, and this is something I'm realizing from my 4 months of initial conversations in Ottawa, from my conversations with your provincial ministers yesterday in Edmonton. And that is the fact that there's a lot of areas which are considered of priority interest for the Philippines for investments that currently Canada might be able to work with us on. Some of those areas, obviously food security, that's already a given. We've been working on that. And as Gary said, the Indo-Pacific Agriculture Hub is based in Manila. But, critical minerals, mining, climate related industries, those are areas where there's a lot of opportunities for investments. We have a public-private partnership program, which I can talk to also a little bit more later on, that has a lot of projects that are open to investments that I think Canadian companies might find to be very interesting. And obviously, of course, our business process outsourcing sector continues to be growing by leaps and bounds, and that's one of the most important major contributor also, not only to employment really, but also to revenue earnings. So. Those are, I think, some of the areas that I am hoping my team and I in Ottawa and with colleagues across the country would be able to bring to the attention of Canadian companies, because there's a lot of opportunity for us to work together.
Excellency, one of the things that I've often done at events like this is I've shared my cell phone number. So if you've got a question, I'd be happy to address it to the ambassador. Here's my number if you want to write it down. A lot of you already have that number because you've been to these events before. So I have a lot more questions, but I also want to know what we can address that is in the interests of our audience. Jason Kenney will almost certainly ask a good question. When it comes, I want to talk about security and the South China Seas, and I want to talk about the Paracel Islands and the Scarborough Shoals. These are international waters that have perhaps between 5 and 8 billion barrels of oil in them, and it's kind of in the middle of the Philippines, Brunei, Vietnam, but China, with its extension of its coastal artificial reefs, is also claiming this area as well. So my question for you is about maritime monitoring and defense cooperation with the Philippines as Canada's tried to step up its presence in the region. So from your perspective, what does a helpful Canadian security partner look like, especially in supporting the stability that underpins our economic ties?
Thank you for that. So let me answer briefly in the context of the issue that we have with China right now, and then I'd like to just zoom out and perhaps look at the question from a broader point of view. But just on the question of China and the other claimants. So you mentioned the other claimants also. I just wanted to mention that next year the Philippines will be the chair of the ASEAN, the Association for Southeast Asian Nations. And as some of you, if not many of you, probably know, we have ongoing for the last 10, 15, 20 years negotiations for a code of conduct in the South China Sea. That has been identified by my government as a priority hopefully for conclusion next year. Obviously, easier said than done.
Well, but sir, let me interrupt you. I got a text here that says, "Can you explain ASEAN? Like, who makes up ASEAN,
okay.
and what do they aspire to do?" That came in from out here.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It brings together as a regional multilateral organization originally the 10 ASEAN countries. I'm gonna miss someone here. Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Myanmar, Malaysia, Lao PDR, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore. That's the original 10. I mean, that's not really the original 10 because there were original 5 only, but those were for many years original 10. Just a couple of weeks ago, we admitted as our 11th member Timor-Leste. So Timor-Leste is now the 11th member of the ASEAN. The ASEAN, as I said, brings together all of these Southeast Asian nations. There are 3 pillars also. So originally, it's focused on the political and security pillar, and then the economic pillar and the socio-cultural pillar. So it's really a regional organization that addresses all of the challenges and opportunities also in those 3 pillars. Every year the chairmanship rotates, and next year the Philippines will be chairing the ASEAN, hosting like over 600 to 800 meetings across the years. There are a couple of summits. The summit in April or May is the summit among our leaders only. But in the summit of the later part of the year in October or November, that's the summit that's broadened to include what we call dialogue partners and and other partners in the Indo-Pacific, Canada included. And that's why, if you've seen in the news, Prime Minister Carney attended the summit in Kuala Lumpur just a couple of weeks ago. I hope that if there's any other specific question, I'm happy to respond to that later on.
Actually, related to it, you mentioned RCEP earlier. You should talk about what RCEP is.
Okay, so RCEP is the regional comprehensive economic partnership. So essentially, it is a free trade agreement that is anchored on ASEAN, the original ASEAN 10. I think East Timor-Leste will now have to accede to RCEP, the original 10, and then it includes all of the other dialogue partners, some dialogue partners in the region, including the 3 main dialogue partners, China, Korea, and Japan. And then, of course, Australia, New Zealand are also part of the RCEP. It actually consolidates all of the FTAs which we had with each other as ASEAN, and which we had with dialogue partners like China, Japan, Korea. So I would have assumed if we had an ASEAN-Canada FTA a few years back, then Canada would probably have been part of the RCEP negotiations as well.
Very good. So let's continue on with this issue of what does a helpful Canadian security partner look like?
So as I said, we're going to hopefully conclude the code of conduct with China and and other ASEAN members during our chairship year next year. But broadly on the issue of security cooperation, and Gary, I think this is an area where Philippines and Canada have been way ahead of the curve in terms of implementing the Indo-Pacific strategy. Because even before the Indo-Pacific strategy and more so during the lifetime of the Indo-Pacific strategy, we have been deeply involved with each other in security cooperation. And I will just mention some of the key fundamental aspects of this cooperation over the last couple of years. One is the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, on the 2nd of November, we signed a visiting forces agreement with Canada. Once that enters into force, it provides a legal framework for the treatment and immunities and privileges of both Canadian military servicemen visiting the Philippines or Philippine military servicemen visiting Canada. And that will also enable Canada to fully participate in regional, multilateral military exercises, such as the Balikatan exercise every April, which is the flagship military exercise originally between the Philippines and the United States, expanded to include Australia when Australia had its own visiting forces agreement with us, and then now with Japan and Australia and Canada having visiting forces agreement also. I know your military is preparing to participate in a big way in April. Hopefully we would have made the visiting forces agreement enter into effect already by then. The other important aspects, I think, of that security cooperation is the support we are getting from you in the dark vessel detection program. For those of you who might be familiar with it, who might not be familiar with it, it's a program, it's a satellite science-based program that allows countries, including Canada and the Philippines, to monitor the seas around the Philippines, for example, and identify ships and what they're doing, even if they turn off their identification systems. So that's why it's called the Dark Vessel Detection Program. Every year also, in the context of the Dark Vessel Detection Program, Fisheries Canada sends one of your Dash 8 maritime domain awareness aircraft to help in doing maritime patrols against illegal, unregulated, undocumented fishing, not only in the Philippines, but also in the Western Pacific, including in Palau and in the other areas. So those are the Dark Vessel Detection Program and the Fisheries Canada program have been very successful, and they've been very popular with our law enforcement authorities, not only in the context of maritime domain awareness from a military point of view, which is very important, but really also from the local law enforcement point of view of, just going after illegal fishing and so on and so forth. And then finally, I think we're looking to Canada in terms of our modernization efforts of the armed forces of the Philippines. There are talks with de Havilland, for example, on trying to see if there are aircraft that's manufactured by de Havilland that would be, appropriate for the needs of the Philippines. But more than that, I think, and this is a discussion we've started with a couple of provinces, including Alberta, is really working together in terms of what we have decided to embark on is self-reliant defense posture program. So we're trying to build our own industrial defense capabilities, and we're looking to reliable, like-minded, democratic partners to help us there, so that we might be able to modernize our military and defense capability. I will just end. President Marcos is very clear. All of this is not directed against any one country. This is just an execution of his constitutional mandate to ensure that he and the armed forces of the Philippines are ready to defend the Philippines against any external threat.
So, a question that comes from my phone here. What is going on with these ships that you're monitoring with the dark ship program? Is it illegal migrants? Is it human trafficking? Is it oil tankers trying to avoid sanctions? What are you looking for?
So we're looking for everything and anything that is illegal, that contravenes either international law or Philippine domestic law. But I would say that from what are very important for us would be, one is the illegal fishing. Trafficking, there are problems here and there, but I think that is pretty much in check, at least in our part of the world, or at least in our part of the region. But obviously, we're also still very mindful of that. We have a strong anti-trafficking regime. But it's really more against illegal fishing. Maritime domain awareness also is very, very fundamental. It's very significant in terms of what we're doing, because we challenge any foreign vessel that comes either without the appropriate permissions or that violates the normal rules of navigation under UNCLOS and other international maritime laws. So I think those two are some of the most fundamental as far as we're concerned.
One of the questions that I had that we talked about before is the Philippines Build Better More program. It's got 200 priority infrastructure projects that exceed 150 billion USD in value. So do you see that there may be realistic openings for Canadian companies that want to partner on these projects? And what do they need to understand about how these projects will move forward?
Thanks, Gary. And that this is one of those important issues and news and developments I think that I really was happy for this opportunity to talk about. So one is just to share that, yes, Gary sort of gave you a bird's eye view of these projects. We can share later on, maybe through Gary's team, the link to the online list of all of these projects. These projects range from infrastructure, from ports, airports, trains, to cold chain, to food hubs, to a lot of sectors that I find Canada has a lot of potential to participate in and to offer. If only, I think, Canadian companies are aware of these opportunities. Now, having said that, what is also very important to underscore is that there have been a lot of tax and investment reforms in the last couple of years that I think makes the Philippines a really more attractive trade and investment destination for companies around the world, including Canadian companies. And I hope companies like Roberts and everyone here will attest to that we have undertaken a lot of trade and investment reforms. The other thing also is that this is a public-private partnership, so there are also government procurement rules that come into play in some of these projects. And again, another positive development is that we have also modernized our government procurement law. So it used to be that you needed to find only the lowest bid, but that's not the case anymore. There are now more qualitative and more up-to-date frameworks for assessing any tender or any bid that is submitted for any of these government projects. And the last thing that I wanted to emphasize is that in the Philippines, I think what is also, and perhaps in many places in the world, what is important is to have a local partner. Because where your value added will most likely be in technology and expertise. You might be surprised to hear capital is sometimes not an issue. There's a lot of liquidity right now in the Philippines. As a matter of fact, most, if not almost all of the projects, the big projects in the Philippines are locally funded. But what is important is for us to be able to bring in technology, expertise, regulatory ways of looking at projects from partners overseas, and that's where we're happy to sort of facilitate introductions, or our Board of Investments has a hand-holding service that companies can avail of in case they want to be linked up with potential local partners. Thank you.
So local partners certainly would have a lot of knowledge of the regulatory environment in which a Canadian company could operate within. But are there also cultural issues that need to be addressed with a Canadian company coming into the Philippines? Or are there barriers with respect to culture?
Not so much. There are, of course, certain nuances. Like I'm sure Robert's familiar. Like yes might not necessarily be a yes, and when you're talking to someone, but those are like really more day-to-day cultural nuances. But I think as the corporate environment and the corporate ecosystem is very much familiar. I think. I mean a lot of our regulations and a lot of our practices are really American-based. So I mean, obviously, there's going to be a lot of similarities. So I don't think it's going to be too much of a culture shock for anyone to be doing business for us, except for those small nuances and of course some quirks here and there, which a local partner can help you with. But I don't think it's too much of an obstacle to be worried about.
I'm familiar with this. Yes doesn't always mean yes idea. And when you're in Japan, the word height means yes, but it can also mean, it's very ambiguous. It might mean, yes, I heard you. Yes, I agree with you. Yes, I don't agree with you. Yeah. Yes, but. So there is some ambiguity.
Can I just interject a little bit of humor, Gary? So in some ways, the yes that is a no is basically just an attempt to make sure we don't disappoint you twice. We don't disappoint you by saying no now and actually not really doing it. So we'll only disappoint you when we don't. Just joking.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. I want to talk about energy. Obviously, this is a province that produces a lot of energy, and as you know, and as we talked about, the Minister of Natural Resources is in Calgary today. The Prime Minister arrives tonight. There's going to be announcements tomorrow. Not sure what they're going to be yet, because those that know won't say, and those that say don't know. But let's talk about LNG in particular. The Philippines is adding LNG capacity while also targeting 35% renewables by 2030. So looking at Canadian strengths from LNG, critical minerals, clean tech, what could Canada contribute the most to your energy security and your transition goals?
So my initial, my initial thinking about this is that Canada, I think, we're hoping, and this is something that I'm trying to still understand. We're having a lot of conversations about this and trying to understand exactly what your capabilities are and how you would be able to sort of participate in our energy needs, because energy is a very fundamental, critical, and dangerous issue right now as far as we're concerned, because as we all know, it's very important for economic growth. It's very important for AI. It's very important for a lot of these other modern technologies that are coming online. And in the Philippines, we are still 70% reliant on hydrocarbons and fuels, but we've stopped building coal power plants anymore. There's a moratorium already. And then, so essentially, I'm hoping that Canada can help us in nuclear, especially in small modular reactors. Although I know that it's also early days, even as far as Canada is concerned, but that is something that we're having a lot of conversations on how we can be able to work together on small modular reactors, because as nuclear, we have some relatively ambitious targets for nuclear. As early as 2032, we already have some ambitious targets for nuclear being part of the energy mix. So that's one. The other thing is LNG. Our Department of Energy is looking at LNG as a transition fuel. It will also be stabilizing because it allows us also to put in LNG once we need to increase base load, for example, and so on and so forth. Again, early conversations on your side. Obviously, there are issues of supply. There's issues of logistics, all the pipeline issues. And on the Philippine side, there's also a lot of infrastructure issues. The only ability we have right now, as far as LNG is concerned, is in one province that unfortunately is actually not on the Pacific-facing side, but on the other side. So then there's whole cost of the issue of cost and the issue of logistics. Getting gas to those places. The other thing, though, is that there are emerging technologies such as hydrogen that I understand is increasingly being looked at also here in this country, and that's what that's something that is also a priority for us right now. So we're hoping that we'd be able to have some discussions as well on that.
Excellency, I'll be happy to report your interest in LNG to the Premier of Alberta and your interest in small modular nuclear to the Premier of Saskatchewan. Here's a question from the audience. Just as there are many Philippine immigrants, so too are there Chinese immigrants who in recent years have indicated problems with coming to Canada, higher costs, lack of jobs, failure to recognize credentials, problems with immigration. Is that what you hear from Filipinos that seek help from your office?
Well, I mean, I don't see any reason not to be honest about these things. Yes, I mean, I guess you can tick almost all of those issues. Yeah. So I mean, but having said that, I know that it's not an easy issue. It's not an issue that's limited to Canada alone. It's an issue that we face not only in traditional host countries for Filipinos, but even in countries that we don't traditionally go to. That's an issue. But I think that only cuts out the work that we have for the embassy and for our colleagues in the consulates. And that's something that, I think we will just constructively work with your government on, rather than make it a public comment or anything.
Just so you know, I'm the chancellor of a university in Edmonton, MacEwan University, and they have a program there called Bridge to Canadian Nursing. And as I looked at the graduates from that program, a lot of them are from the Philippines, some are from Malaysia, but predominantly Filipino. I'd like to invite you to come to our next graduation exercise so that you congratulate all these people that are going to become nurses in the Canadian system.
Happy to.
What the Philippines needs from Canada. So this question is, As Canada updates its Indo-Pacific strategy, what are the top priorities that the Philippines would like to see Canada focus on, especially when it comes to trade, investment, and innovation over the next 5 years, or roughly the tenure of your time here in Canada?
I think, Gary, I've spoken a lot about the areas where we're working together, the areas where I think you might be able to work with us on. In response to that question, I think, so generally those ideas that I put out there in response to our questions, a ditto, I guess, for this particular question. But I think just broadly, what I would ask Canada really to do, especially now as it re-examines its Indo-Pacific strategy, is just continue to be engaged in the Indo-Pacific. We are happy with what we've seen so far. We're happy that you put your money where your mouths are. We're happy that, speaking especially for the Philippines, about how we've worked together across all areas of the Indo-Pacific strategy, whether it's security cooperation, economic partnership, people to people. But I think what really needs to happen is that you continue to be engaged for the long term. Again, I'm going to be honest with everyone. There are a lot of skeptics out there. I'm sure you have heard from them. I'm sure others have heard from them. There's a lot of skeptics about whether this is not a phase, a passing fad. Many people say we've seen this before, not only with Canada but with many other countries, about trying to say pivot to Asia, pivot to the Asia-Pacific and Indo-Pacific. But I'd like to think that from what I've seen in terms of the Indo-Pacific strategy and from how your government's been working at least with my government over the last couple of years, I'd like to think that Canada is finally recognizes that you are an Indo-Pacific country, and that you will continue to be engaged with the Indo-Pacific for the long term. And I think that will only be for the better of all of us.
So that's actually an interesting segue to the next question, which I was going to ask, is you talked about Canada recognizing that it's an Indo-Pacific nation. If you were to think 5 years out from now, 2030, what would you like to be able to say about how far Canada-Philippine relations have come in the next 5 years? What would you like to be able to say looking in the rearview mirror in 2030?
Okay, so let me respond with a couple of really specific things, and then I'll respond with something more general and perhaps more philosophical. Specific things: our visiting forces agreement would have entered into force, and that our security cooperation could only be more robust and could be only more strengthened, and that we provide a whole network of deterrence in the Indo-Pacific towards anyone who might think of disrupting the peace that has provided the foundations for the economic prosperity of the Indo-Pacific for the last how many years. I would hope that we would have concluded in 2026, so that's what, 14 years ago or something, the ASEAN-Canada FTA and the Philippine-Canada FTA. And those two agreements, together with all of the other agreements that we have in the Indo-Pacific, and together with the work that everyone does, we continue to build on the economic growth of both our nations. And then obviously, on the people-to-people side, I hope we would have achieved that fair and just situation of our professionals being able to come here and to have whatever they trained for, whatever they were educated for, appropriately recognized. Cognizant, of course, about the right of Canada to make sure domestic regulations are met, and that safety and everything is and consumer protection is addressed. But I think we need to work together to make sure that it takes lesser time and lesser cost for professionals who you say are welcome in this country, to help build your country, to be able to do their to exercise their professions and to do what they've been trained for in a reasonably quick manner. So those are, I think, some of the specific things I want to, and then obviously perhaps companies like Roberts doubling their investments in the Philippines and others. But I think more broadly and more philosophically, I just wanted to hark back to what My foreign minister, Secretary Tess Lazaro, said a couple of years back when she was in Ottawa for our Joint Commission on Bilateral Cooperation meeting, when she described Philippine-Canada relations to be in a renaissance. We know that there were upheavals that came after the Renaissance or during the Renaissance, but I'd like to set that aside and I'd like to just look at 30 years from now as us being in a post-Renaissance period. So obviously, remember, after the Renaissance, there was the Age of Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution. So I hope that we will have something like that also for Philippine-Canada relations. A relationship that builds on our people, a relationship that builds on our shared values, and a relationship really that builds on our shared objectives for peace and security, for economic growth and prosperity, and for human security between between Canadians and the Philippines, and obviously, I guess, the rest of the international community, including, of course, the rest of the Indo-Pacific. And so that's what I hope we'll have, a post-Renaissance period after all of the hard work that we are all doing today, amidst all of the turbulence that's being created by headwinds and by challenges that are not of our own making. Thank you.
I'm going to preface my last question by first of all saying, Ambassador, your consulate here in Calgary does an excellent job, and I want to give full credit to the Consul General for the services that she provides to the community here. It's exceptional. So here's the hardest question of the day. Ready? If you were to think of one dish that your mother made that makes you think back to your childhood, what dish would that be and why?
Oh, no.
I know, it's a hard one, right?
That's unfair. Well, that's difficult because my mom was never a cook. Yeah, unfortunately. But if I can answer by the dish of my grandmother, and she was Chinese, so it's a rice dish. So Filipinos were big into rice. So it's called arroz. So which is basically just a translation of rice. So, but we called it arroz. But it's pretty much like chicken fried rice. If you go to a Japanese or Chinese restaurant which soya based or soy based, but I mean, we always say that our mothers, our grandmothers, our wives, will always cook the best the best steak, the best adobo, the best pancit, the best lumpia. Regardless of anything else.
So Premier Kenny's been to my house for dinner, so he'll know that I'm actually the chef in our house, not my wife. The only thing that my wife knows how to make for dinner is reservations, okay? So I invite you to come to my home at some point, and I will make you chicken fried rice. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon.